And let's continue with the first chapter of the Darkangel, which is called The Steeps of Terrain. We have met Ariel, who is the servant of Eowyn. They are gathering flowers in the mountains with their baskets with 6 hours of daylight to go. Ariel is frightened. Eowyn is teasing her about this and making her carry both baskets. And we will continue from where we left off. But by the Pendarlin, if I'd known you'd be so clumsy, I might have allowed more time. Ariel blushed and looked away. It was true. She was clumsy, and beside her mistress's deft grace, always felt doubly so. Her companion tilted one shoulder in a shrug and glanced at Ariel. Don't fear, little lameling. If you should twist an ankle or knock yourself silly falling off a ledge, I'll carry you and the baskets back in less time than it's taken us getting this far. Ariel felt her color deepen, bit her lip against retort. She wasn't lame, just awkward and unsure. Eowyn knew that. Ariel's knuckles on the basket whitened. She glanced at Eowyn. The syndic's daughter smiled at her carelessly. Ariel's eyes stung. These were the only times she ever resented Eowyn, who used that hated name, Lameling, she realized, only to bait her. This time, though, she seemingly meant no teasing by it. Perhaps she even intended it affectionately. Ariel relaxed her hands and let her color fade. You needn't worry about the other either, her companion was saying. Her tone was one of friendly tolerance. I won't lose the way, and if you keep by me, you won't either. Ariel sighed and shoved her thoughts away, fell into step behind Eowyn again. The sun felt warm on Ariel's back, and the shadows, whenever the path ducked behind boulder or ledge, were cold as well water. She dropped one basket from her hip as the trail grew narrower, let the light, bulky mesh of the twined marsh grass bump against her leg. They climbed. She fell to watching the landscape, the lie of the rocks. She listened to the bellthorn's silvery thin briars that tinkled like glass in the rare mountain wind. She watched the small rose-colored lizards sunning themselves in the last hours of Solstar before crawling into their crags again to sleep for another long nightshade. She looked at the petrified bones in the rock, bones of fishes, eels, and water plants left over from the time when the steeps had been nothing but flat mud bottom and all the world a sea. Here are some, said Eowyn, halting so abruptly Ariel almost ran into her. Ariel eyed the low-spread blossoming shrub at their feet. Eowyn gazed forward and gestured ahead. And there are more up the slope. They were near the pinnacle of the mountain. Ariel could scarcely feel herself breathe. The sky was blacker here, the sun whiter, the earth bluer, the stars brighter. When Ariel looked down, she could see the light, luminous haze of the atmosphere lying on the foothills, on the plain. You pick these, Eowyn was telling her, taking her own basket back. I'll get the ones farther up. It was difficult for Ariel to hear her, the air was so thin. She obviously was shouting, but Ariel, only a pace away, had trouble making out the more faintly spoken words. She nodded her reply. You brought a flask, didn't you? Demanded Eowyn, taking hold of the empty one she herself wore on a thong hung from her neck. It was a simple water skin for desert travel, a couple of handspans long, made of white kid with an ivory stopper and beads of tinted bone. Ariel nodded and tapped her own smaller, undecorated flask hanging from her neck. Good then, cried Eowyn softly, as from a great distance. Stay here in sight, don't wander, and don't spill any. Ariel nodded. Eowyn slung her basket over one shoulder and went on up the last steepest 20 paces to the top. Ariel watched her easy, sure-footed ascent, her mistress's free hand resting lightly on a rock or boulder from time to time to help her balance. Ariel wished that she could have been born so long-limbed, so self-sure, so beautiful. She set her basket down and knelt beside the horn scrub, began gathering the flowers. These horn flowers grew on a tiny gray-silver bush which lived only on the highest steeps, where the air was rare and perilously thin. Not the slightest breeze ever stirred to disturb them. Each branch of the bush was covered with tiny trumpet-shaped flowers, yellowish-white, translucent as frost. Each trump was filled with a tiny drop of pale golden liquor, sweeter than ginger and richer than rum. Ariel pulled one blossom ever so gently from its twig. The trick was to gather them one by one painstakingly so that not a drop was spilled in either the picking or the pouring from flower to wineskin. The task was made doubly difficult by the flocks of tiny humming swifts, no bigger than fireflies, that swarmed about the flowers, the lip of the wineskin, and could, between 3 or 4 of them, drink a horn dry before Ariel could get the flower from bush to bottle. She shooed at them with one hand while keeping the other, holding the flower perfectly steady. Ariel dropped the first, emptied trump, into the mesh basket beside her and reached slowly for another bloom, and then another and another. The motions became mechanical. Her back began to ache, and her legs felt stiff, but Ariel ignored the pains, waved away the bothersome bee-birds, and continued gathering. A marriage was to take place in the village at sundown, dusk being the customary and proper time for weddings in Averick. Eowyn, as eldest cousin to the bride, was pledged to bring the bridal cup of hornbloom nectar and garlands of the wedding trumps. But these could be harvested only a few hours before the marriage, the precious liquor and delicate blossoms so quickly spoiled. It seemed to Ariel, as she poured the contents of another pale trumpet-shaped flower into the goat-hide bottle, that the humming of the tiny swifts had grown rather louder and shrill. She tossed the empty flower into the basket and ignored the sound to concentrate on carefully plucking another blossom. She imagined the preparations in the village, the decking of the streets with banners of white gauze, the bathing of the bride. It occurred to Ariel then that the sound she was hearing was not the angry whine of humming swifts, but something else, a voice. Eowyn is calling me, she thought, as she pulled the flower away from the stalk. The pitch of the voice changed abruptly, intensified. Ariel brought the hornbloom to the rim of the bottle. No, not calling anymore, she realized suddenly. Screaming. Ariel dropped the flower, felt its droplets spill hot as a tear. No, hotter. Hot as tallow. It burned her hand. She looked up the slope to where Eowyn was. The basket of wedding trumps lay overturned at Eowyn's feet. Her young mistress was standing mute now, looking up at the sky. Then Ariel saw wings. Very near, great wings descending, a creature with more wings than she could count, all black, all beating fiercely. She felt a faint breeze against her cheek. For all the fury of those terrible wings, the air was too thin to carry more than a feeble gust. They were jet, those wings, as deep as the sky, as black as Eowyn's hair. No, blacker, for they were dull, uncoiled. They gave off no sheen in the light, no gleam to the eye. They drank up the light and diminished it. They were wings of pure shadow. It seemed to Ariel, as she watched that storm of darkness descend, that she discerned the figure of a man at its heart, a man dressed in some pale garment, a man of fair complexion, but the wings beat with such rapidity against the near empty air that she could not make out his face. The figure reached the mountain top and alighted, but barely. His sandaled feet hardly touched the stone. Before him, Eowyn cried out in terror. Though Ariel knelt not 20 paces from her, the sound was distant, as though it had traveled miles. He held out his arms to Eowyn, abruptly, as in command. Eowyn backed away. The Darkangel stepped toward her. Ariel could see only the vague white shimmer of his garment amid the dark fury of still beating wings. Eowyn whirled and began to run down the slope toward Ariel. She had not taken 2 steps before the vampire had swooped and caught her. Ariel heard Eowyn's piercing cry. The Icarus speed and Eowyn's weight bore them forward and down. His powerful wings thrashed the air. Ariel bolted to her feet too fast. Her legs, stiff from long sitting, would not bear her. The vampire swooped overhead. So close Ariel could have reached to touch him. The world had reeled, and falling, she threw up her arms. Then not to touch, but to ward off the cold, fleeting shade of those horrible wings. Her knees buckled. She felt her feet skid from under her. The Darkangel was gaining altitude above her. She saw Eowyn still struggling in his arms, but could no longer hear her screams. Ariel felt her elbow strike the earth, and then her shoulder as a dozen sharp, hard, rolling pebbles dug into her flesh. The ground was in motion beneath her, slipping, sliding. The Icarus was already far away, a dark blot against the stars. She glimpsed the shadow of his dozen wings, very small against Oceanus. "Eowyn! Eowyn!"